of product managers and data scientists. And the way we differentiate between the two, by the way, the data scientists are the ones that organize the information, will capture the data from whatever game that we are analyzing, and they will create a dashboard to display that data. And you can do that with many tools. There are several means to generate the data and assemble it into dashboards. And there are some off-the-shelf solutions as well that you can utilize for that purpose. We have used commonly for mobile free-to-play games, we have used Delta DNA. It's a very comprehensive analytics solution that plugs into your game's backend and draws in all the data that you may require. It's a very powerful tool. There are many others. We don't need to list them all right here. If you do a cursory check on Google, you'll find a ton of them. But that really, the data scientists are really dealing with games that are already in the market and producing results. The consumers are playing the game, and we can interpret the data the consumers are generating. What we're talking about at the pre-ideation and ideation stages is very different. This is interpreting not the data that your game generates, because obviously your game doesn't exist, but what the market as a whole can tell us about the commercial viability of a certain title. And the data scientists are not involved with that process. We have our product managers driving that. And the product managers are the people that interpret data. So, by looking at a dashboard that shows the results of your analytics data capture, a product manager would be able to infer that your design needs to change in these 3 or 4 ways. So there are people that have the experience necessary to provide the designers quantitative and qualitative feedback derived from consumer or market behavior. And so how do you get a skill? Becoming a product manager in the games industry is an art and a science. Some quantitative mathematical background is usually required because you are effectively working with complex data sets, but you don't need to be a database specialist and be able to code in Python like a data scientist would need. The product manager is primarily a person that has a quantitative background, but also has a game designer's knowledge. It's kind of an intermarriage of like statistical and game design expertise. Very rare to find people with that skill in our industry. They're very rare. Generally, indie studios don't have that person in the mix. Sometimes the game designer tries to do a little bit of that work. But if they don't have like a strong statistical, mathematical, quantitative expertise, they would be fairly challenged to interpret complex data sets. So we use our product managers as our market researchers as well. In larger companies, actually, those skills are specialized and distinct because market research really is a discipline of its own, and there are a few ways to determine whether a concept or a game idea has commercial potential. One of the ways to do it is to contract a study, a market study. There are a couple of sources of market studies that you may consider valuable. One is EDAR, E-E-D-A-R. This is a company that will give you a sample market study for a particular genre or subgenre segmentations. Let's say in the case of Bushitel, which is the Amber game that you saw in my presentation, the segmentation would be narrative, adventure, console, indie games. And they would be able to produce a sample of titles that have launched in the last 5 years that meet those characteristics and the sales data that those titles have generated. And from that, you can infer with a fair amount of accuracy whether the titles were profitable or not. Because you already know, you should know, like, I don't know, what your game should cost, you know, and then you can look at what the titles generated versus the approximate cost of their games. You know, it's, you know, very high level interpretation, right? I mean, you know, maybe something that looks to you that will cost $1.5 million actually costs $2 million. But you know you're kind of in the ballpark, and that's usually good enough. Because if you find that most of the games that had those characteristics have made a marginal profit, or likely didn't make a profit, didn't even make their money back, you kind of know that you're on shallow water. You have two approaches there. You either stop developing that game at that particular budget that you initially conceived, so you think of that shorter, more scoped down experience, or you look elsewhere, right? I mean, that's good feedback that, you know, the market is not really sustaining that type of content. That the demand that game generates is simply not there. Now, mind you, sometimes you will be, because you're indie game developers, maybe you are building a game that doesn't fit any known paradigms. You only have like very broad terms of comparison. You know, like I'm thinking here of Minecraft. When Minecraft was first launched, yeah, I mean, you could say that it's a sandbox game, but really Minecraft was unlike anything else that came before. However, those examples are very rare. So in most cases, buying a report from EDAR or yourself, looking at sales data in the market through any means conceivable. Maybe, you know, one of your friends, for example, works for you know, a company that has an App Annie account, and if you are making a mobile game, App Annie is a good source of sales information for the game. And maybe he can tell you, you know, you tell me, hey, for these 5 games that I've identified, can you tell me what the sales data are? And so this is a very inexpensive and, how should I say, rogue way to get yourself some market data so you can make informed decisions. You know, normally you wouldn't go that route. Normally you would buy a market study from EDAR, or another good source is Nielsen. So Nielsen, so the difference between EDAR and Nielsen is that EDAR is a games industry creature. It's just like a small startup that provides that service. Nielsen is kind of the most expensive way that you can conduct market research. Obviously, they have specialized resources and tools to draw in a lot of data from various domains. Nielsen does a lot of like broadcast, like TV industry, analytics, and engagement metrics. So the games, they have a games division. The games division is well resourced, well endowed, but you know, generally the reports look very professional, but they're expensive. The way we tackle this at Amber, we have not used Nielsen so far because it's a little bit too rich for our budgets. We have used EDAR on discrete occasions, and we also have our own, you know, App Annie account. For mobile stuff, and there are a few other sources of information like sensor data to draw in sales data for various titles. But what is most important, regardless of where you get your data from, it's important that you are targeting some conclusions out of the data. And this report that I'm going to present to you kind of shows you, this is just a general report, it's not for a specific game. You'll notice that it has some references to Metascore, which implies that this is like a report made for a console title, but you can use these categories for any kind of game. So what are you trying to derive? You want to understand what the top 3 strengths for your titles are. I should pause here for a second. Earlier when I was mentioning market opportunity, I was looking at sales data for comps, which is the most widely encountered way to measure the potential success of a title that you're about to develop. And that's what I would call pre-ideation. Even before you get to your concept, you flush out your concept, you need to understand that you're playing in a pool that has opportunity, that you have at least the theoretical possibility for commercial success. Boom. Once you've established that, you have to look a bit deeper at your concept. And what this report tackles is not just what the market tells us in terms of sales data, but what the strengths and weaknesses of your concept are. So really, this should be an outcome, to derive the top 3 strengths and the top 3 weaknesses, and then a summary of the actions that usually the product manager is recommending. And the product manager may recommend a complete overhaul of the design, may recommend we abandon the concept altogether. They're incentivized to be as objective as possible in their appraisal, and they are not affiliated with a studio that is producing the game concept. They will sit, they sit in a separate guild, we call it a business intelligence guild. There are not many of them, we have 4 out of 400 people, so small numbers, but they're essential to being able to greenlight a particular game idea into the concept phase. So here's a sample for Mario & Sonic Tokyo 2020 and Olympic Games. Top 3 strengths. Story mode gives the collection of mini-games some structure. Retro mini-games make an attempt at appealing at an older and more hardcore players. By the way, you might not be familiar with the game, so most of what I'm saying here might be gibberish, but I'm just giving you an example of what the output of the product manager would be like in that situation. Top 3 weaknesses. BC release window away from the licensed event reduces the appeal of the release for the sake of a later score bump. So obviously at this point when the evaluation was performed, there was a clear idea when the title will be releasing. So the product manager will look at the competitive landscape in the market. In most cases, that information will not be available at pre-ideation. You will not know when your title is releasing. Or if you think you know, you're probably lying to yourself, or you're tied into a publisher milestone. There's a marketing event or some type of event, and you know that your game has to hit the market at that time, in the time frame. That's an unfortunate scenario, but it happens all the time because you will have, like Amber did. Amber had the opportunity to release Cinderella Freefall day and date with a movie release. It was a feature film, if you remember, back in 2015. Not a very memorable film, definitely not a blockbuster, but it was a kind of okay showing for Disney, and they wanted that game to release day and date to the movie. Why? Very important reason is that Disney has the ability to run commercials before the movie runs at a very low cost to them. So they could effectively air a commercial for the game in all the theaters across US and Western Europe that showcased our game. So that's an amazing marketing opportunity. It's millions of dollars worth of marketing value. And if we didn't release day and date, we might have released a better game. We only had like about 6 months of total development time, which is crazy. I will never do that again. Because we killed ourselves doing it. It was like crunch from the beginning to the end. And I vowed not to crunch again like that. But we did it. At the time, it seemed like an amazing opportunity. We were tied into a release date. So at that, when you have a situation like that, you can look at your competitive landscape. You can, if you're 6 months out and you know your release date, you can see maybe you have intel on other titles in that particular category that are releasing at the same time. For example, if I knew that King is releasing Bubble Witch Saga 2 at the very same time as I'm releasing that game, the mechanics are very similar. We're talking about the match 3 versus line drawing puzzle game. We know that the competitive landscape will be crowded, and the product manager, like in this case, may treat this as a weakness. And it truly will be a weakness, yes.
How this kind of insight, in effective way, and how this kind of insights will come to the programming stage, to the core mechanics stage, how is this downfall to the paper, to the actual code?
Yeah, it's probably useful to go a little bit even farther before, like, so pre-ideation kind of isolates a general market opportunity. And truly, pre-ideation should happen organically and continuously throughout the year. I mean, product managers should look at the market landscape and identify opportunities. Like, hey, in this quadrant, with this audience, with this game genre, with this gameplay mechanic, we feel there's money to be made. We feel that the desire for content far outstrips the current output that the industry puts out, right? So at that point, the designers within Amber or within any studio should be able to think of game ideas, and should, they will start at the highest level, adventure, narrative-driven adventure game. They could think of like, okay, the setting is inspired from the Grimm Brothers folk tales. Again, I'm giving you bushy tail examples here, and family entertainment. So with those tenets, you can already start to break down some commonalities in terms of gameplay, right? And you can take this a step further, where the product manager is telling you what gameplay characteristics would have most resonance in the market, looking at the competitive landscape of things that have already launched, as well as things that will be launching in the future. Both of those are important. Things that already launched tell you the actual commercial performance of the game. Things that are about to launch in the future are telling you whether you need to differentiate yourself from the competition so that you are not being treated as a direct competitor to Bubble Witch Saga.
Yeah.
Right? So in our case, for Cinderella Freefall, I mean, we didn't have the luxury of, being able to pivot the design very much, because Disney had a very clear idea of what they wanted. They wanted a match 3 style puzzle game. However, knowing that we had competition, we moved from match 3 to line draw, which actually in the end proved to be a wrong choice. But for things that a product manager at that time could not have estimated. And I'll explain that. This is actually really interesting. Market research is not a silver bullet. It will not give you 100% means to create a hit, but it will take you probably 80% of the way there.
And in that terms, how is the look of the product management?
So product managers and designers usually work very closely at all stages of development, because one discipline informs the other. Usually the game designers are more creatives, and they're like hardcore gamers that understand game systems in a profound way. Product managers are usually instructed to look at a game design and analyze one, viability of the monetization sinks. Like, are we putting monetization sinks in this game in the right places and at sufficient intervals to generate good revenue? And they kind of have a system for establishing, like, by looking at comps, but also like, drawing from their experience with other games in a similar genre. They can, give you an idea whether your monetization design can fit well within the game design that our creatives have generated. So it's like a monetization design. We're talking free-to-play, first of all. So this is very mobile free-to-play centric. It does not obviously pertain to premium titles. And generally speaking, product managers are useful for market research for premium titles. But then it's like game designers running amok. It is obviously an experience that a product manager will not be able to influence, because you don't have microtransactions, or at least you wouldn't have until that initial release of a game is successful. You could still microtransact the premium game through DLC, content packs, soundtracks, T-shirts, and merchandise, right? You can merchandise a premium game, and that's a form of microtransacting the game. And product manager could help you with that, with price points for those things that are appealing, and some testing in regards to what the community wants. What we're talking about here is that the game design is a platform for a monetization scheme. And the monetization scheme has to be calibrated. It cannot be too loose, that you're not going to have enough revenues coming in. It cannot be too tight, then you have, you're basically too rapacious, too mercenary in your, and you'll repel users. You know, be like, oh, I can't even play this game. Or they're asking me to give them $2 every time, right? That's not a good experience. However, you know, coming back to what I was saying earlier here, it's important to note what the priority actions this product manager has recommended. Okay, so they recommended to review the launch window and basically asked us to reconsider the schedule or to consolidate minigame quality. They basically, out of the kind of design brief that they received for the title, they thought that the minigame quality is not quite there. Strengthen story mode. Make a strong choice on whether to target hardcore gamers. What basically they're saying here is that this game is trending more towards a casual audience by its nature. And if you want hardcore gamers, you'll have to take some steps in that direction. Either by enhancing certain game modes that are more hardcore in fashion, or by changing the message when it comes to the game. But this is like, you know, for us, let's say the business people that are making decisions at Amber, once you receive this evaluation, it gives us a good set of topics to discuss and to analyze that game idea through before we greenlight into concept. Because as soon as you greenlight things into concept, you saw earlier in my GDF phases, you're basically saying goodbye to 10% of your total development budget, which can be significant. For a game that costs $1 million, we're talking about $200,000. That's not chump change. And so this is quite important. Right, genre and competitor analysis. This is what we were talking about recently. Here's the game, when it was released, what score it received, if it's applicable, meta score will be applicable for console titles, premium titles in general. You'd have the user rating for mobile titles, so the App Store user rating for mobile titles, and the interpretation. This is usually optional. It's a genre trends analysis. Sometimes when you do research, you're able to identify some trends in the market. And that's useful to get a holistic perspective of what is happening. Comparable titles review performance. You're looking at number of reviews here. You look at different ratings for those titles. You look at sales performance, which is really the crux. I mean, this is the bit of information that would be most useful for me. I would not pay as much attention to how other games fared from a scoring perspective, but that is very much in the execution, in the way that the title was developed. But the sales performance tells me more accurately how the market is reacting to that particular genre and style of game. Right. And overall feedback. This is like where the product manager can let loose and provide their own thoughts based on their experience, and they could be useful as well. Client queries. These are specific things that maybe the designers or management have asked. So I could be like, okay, can you tell me if you see any issues with that game design from a COPPA compliance perspective? So we're talking about Bushy Tail again, it's family entertainment. Is there anything in the game that you would consider to infringe on COPPA? And as you know, COPPA is a child regulation legislation. Yeah, it's quite drastic. If you make any game that may be played by children, you have to ensure that you are not capturing their data, that you have proper disclaimers in the game. I may ask the product managers to research that as one of the ad hoc research topics. All right, so then you go to the strengths and weaknesses. We kind of reviewed that already. That's basically the crux of the high-level dashboard that you saw in the title. And that's basically what I expect to see at the ideation stage. And to me, as a business leader, and to the head of studios, and to the executive producer in charge of that particular game, it's the information that we require in order to green light or not. Okay? Sounds fairly straightforward. I'll recap a little bit the names that you need to remember here. You either do this with a specialized resource, maybe a consultant. I'm going to share this template with you because it's very useful. The consultant should be equipped to deliver this information to you. If they're not, you can buy a study, a market research study from EDAR or from Nielsen. And EDAR probably is the more reasonable. But they will be able to largely, effectively, deliver this information to you. The most important piece of data is the sales data. If you have nothing else, just ask for a friend in the industry that has an App account or mobile or some type of NPD tracking data account to give you the sales data for at least 5 titles that are in your quadrant, right? And try to define the quadrant as tightly as possible. And then you can infer from that whether the title is profitable or not. Good. By the way, nothing beats common sense. Let's say you don't have any data, right? And you're thinking about making a Roblox game because you heard that a kid in Sweden is making $20 million a year making Roblox games. Even if you have no access to sales tracking solutions, you can pretty much inquire how many of these kids are making money making Roblox games. And actually, you'll find that the answer is quite a few. And then you can make a Roblox game. Yes, it's true. There are quite a few people that are making money on Roblox as a platform. It's it's not a secret in the industry anymore because they started to do a ton of PR around it. But a couple of years back, it was kind of a secret, and the platform was growing gangbusters, and there were money to be made on the platform, and the barriers of entry were low. Anyone could submit their own game, and if the people were playing it, you'd start to monetize. So, sometimes common sense can take you a long way too. Read industry publications, keep track of what is happening. Things change in games all the time, right? And no year is the same as previous year. Sometimes the shifts are dramatic. Let me ask you this: in your view, what are the most important shifts that have intervened over the last year in games? Okay.
Oh, that's a good question.
Question. Okay. Yes.
The democratization of VR with the release of the NUESTRAS.
Okay, that's a good one.
Subscription services for the solution of games.
Or in the App Store.
So subscription services.
Yeah. That's a really good one. Yes.
I think studios are releasing more alpha releases and sort of test the market a little bit.
Especially on Steam, early release, yeah? Early access? Yeah. That's a good one, yes. What about
Stadia streaming other platforms?
Battle Royale?
Yeah.
Oh my god, what happened? All of a sudden, everybody's making billions. How didn't we see that coming? Actually,
esports, China.
Esports is huge. It's been growing. Actually, here are the trends on esports, because you mentioned esports. Growing like gangbusters in emerging markets, stabilizing in the US. There's a cap in the US on esports. Wow. We kind of have seen the peak of esports. Maybe it will continue to grow as a result of new games releasing. But for the first time, we're seeing sort of flat revenues in esports year on year in the US only. Anything else?
The reaction YouTube videos as a kind of core mechanic?
Yes, and Twitch too, right? Basically participatory YouTube or like, you know, streaming viewing, right? Participatory viewing.
The viewer as part of the whole player experience thing, maybe.
VR?
No, not just VR on the platform, but the viewer as an essential part
the
of
viewer.
actually,
Sorry.
like the following models might just take into account that they're being seen by X amount of people that can intervene in the game. That's one of the things that I'm pretty sure that's going to happen eventually.
The specialization of the market. So the game industry is no longer the hardcore gamer and the casual gamer. There's the hardcore gamer for shooters. There's a hardcore gamer for just solo play games. So it's getting super specialized in the market you're targeting for.
Yes, and the offering is so deep that you, as a specialized gamer, you'll never run out of content and new stuff releasing all the time. Absolutely, that's actually a great insight. Didn't think of that one yet. There are a few others, big ones. You know, on the business end of things, there's been quite a bit of consolidation. There've been, you probably heard of a company called Keywords that's been going crazy, like buying all the service companies in the industry. And they are, I believe, like $300 million in revenues. And they reach that by buying a ton of small companies. You know, they buy like between 5 and 10 companies every year. So that was kind of a case study in consolidation on the service sector. From a gameplay perspective, we have seen the importance of community, not just like the viewers contributing to the game experience, but also the community taking down games. Okay, you're releasing something, you're making some big mistakes, maybe you are microtransacting like a mofo, the community will take that game down. Okay, they will trash talk you into the oblivion. Or you release a game that is not complete, or it has some fundamental design flaws, like Anthem, the community will take you down. Yeah. So it's very important to be connected with the community. It kind of reinforces the importance of early access, getting people a perspective to the game. They will certainly forgive you if you're alpha. They will not forgive you if you have the formal launch and you go into the market. So anyway, that's cool. See, all of these insights, you don't need a product manager for. It's just all of these trends you can ride through your game design, you know, and you'll be far better off because all the trends are, by definition, closer to blue ocean than to the red ocean, right? So now you have to move fast, right? If we're talking Battle Royale, which I think from a business perspective was probably the largest trend that arose in the past year. You know, PUBG was there for a little while, but it's like really the Fortnite coming into the market and just blowing the doors open. Now, you have to see that trend early, you have to develop fast, you need to have a great experience that can compete with whatever else is in the market, but you're riding a wave, right? So riding that wave can take you very far. And so, you know, start there with your ideation. Look at the market, read, you know, industry publications. You probably know them all. I will sound stupid saying them, but you know, Gamma Sutra, GamesIndustry.biz, Kotaku, Polygon. You tell me, what else? What am I missing? What are you reading that I'm not reading?
The GDC vote.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Watch the lectures. You know, the GDC is like heavily scripted. Like if you work for a large company, PR will like say you cannot say this, this, and this. Like I wouldn't be able to show you what I'm showing you here if I worked at EA, right? And but I'm, you know, independent and a rebel, so I'll show you everything I have. So you know, look at it, but please be cognizant that you may not find all the morsels of truth that you're looking for. Sometimes you have better luck at a smaller conference where people like me are speaking. No, we speak at big conferences too, but the smaller conferences might be more loose and like, hey, here's here's what we're seeing, here's the data. But yeah, read and watch lectures, and travel to conferences if you can, because nothing beats talking to people. So networking at conferences, talk to people in the industry, be like, hey, what trends are you seeing? And I guarantee you'll be surprised. No single person will answer that the exact same way. So, and then you'll be like, wow, I didn't even see that coming. And you do a little bit of your own research, you look through the news, and it's like, oh, this thing is like gathering steam. Do I have the opportunity to play in that emerging trend, or am I really late? I'm behind the curve, so to speak. You make that determination, you're off to the races. And what's off to the races? Concept. Okay, so concept. It's assumed that you have a candidate, which is your idea that has been market validated. You feel pretty sure you're writing the trends. You're pretty sure you have market data that shows, all right, I'm making a game that has commercial relevance, that people actually want. Because that's what we are. We're entertainers. We need to reach as many people as possible. Never forget that. I sometimes, I'm explaining this over and over again to my own people. Hey guys, I know you're excited about this. But if you made it through the ideation phases, as I explained, that should be behind us, because we already established there's a commercial relevance.
How do you, just because you're touching that point, how do you manage, education is repetition somehow. So how do you manage, because you've got hundreds of people in your company, so how do you manage actually repeating everything and actually making sure that it goes all the way to the rest of the troops? That's kind of hard.
I'm a broken record. And sometimes I will start my speech with, maybe you guys already heard this a lot of times, so forgive me if I repeat myself. No, but so in Amber we have studios, and within studios we have multiple tracks. So our casual studio currently is developing 2 games in parallel, and I talk to each game team, right? And each game team will go through the ideation process and so on and so forth. By the way, in our world, if we're doing work for hire, that ideation process is abbreviated by what the client wants.
That's
And sometimes we will challenge the client. Client comes to us and be like, we're going to pay you, Amber, to make some games, and we'll be like, hey, we've done this research that you may want to look at. It shows that you're not really in the right quadrant. But most of the time, they've done their own research and they know what they want.
Right.
So that basically pushes you directly into concept without the need for ideation. Now coming back to the teams, you always explain this concept in a small group, and you do it often, as often as they require that hand-holding, really. And people change in studio, so you sometimes have to go through the GDF anyway. And you notice that this program for us is called Amber Academy. There's an Amber Academy for Amber employees, and there's an Amber Academy for the community at large. So we actually run the GDF course, and it's not me teaching it usually. It's our head of studios and our head of product development that teaches the internal courses. Yeah, sometimes it will be kind of old info, same old. And you can engage the veterans in that exchange. You have some new people on, in the course, and you have some old people, and then you can be like, hey, Jorge, you've been through this. Tell me why this is important. Why was it relevant for your project? And not only this, we have the example of fucking failing so many times, at Amber, making games that were not commercially successful, and be like, so here's what we did with Rumble Heroes. We didn't fucking test anything. There was no ideation process there. We're we had this idea, and let's go for it. And that's an example of how not to do things.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So, but yeah. Now, if you're a 2-person indie studio, it doesn't matter. But if you have more than 10 employees, having a structured course format to teach them the fundamentals of game development is actually a good idea. Because a structured course format has forces you to create a structure. You know, like you need to have something in the presentation. You need to have a curriculum, so to speak. Right? So, all right. So you have your concept candidate, and now proposed concept phase, budget, and timeline. Careful. Concept phase. At this point, you really have no idea what your game will cost. And if you do, you kind of lying to yourself. The best,
For sure.
and sometimes you're lying to yourself in such egregious manner that it's like it's ridiculous. Yeah, because I think our initial budget for Rumble Heroes was 500K, right? And we're like 1.5K, 1.5 million, and we could still have like, you know, sunk another 500K easy, just to get to like the game as we actually wanted it. But it's important that you understand how many people and how much time do you need for the concept phase activities. And this is what's happening within the concept phase. You iterate on your concept. You have your market opportunity assessment already. I just included it here to make sure that in this deck I didn't have pre-ideation, ideation broken up. But this is basically you have this at the entry into your concept phase. Financial opportunity assessment is basically the same thing. It's the sales data comps. Preliminary product requirements document. So the PRD is an abbreviated form of the GDD plus TDD. Are you guys familiar with these terms? GDD, TDD? Game design document, technical design document. And this is not it. This is just kind of high level. Okay, this is what the design will be, and high level, this is how we're going to build the game. And research of concept strengths and challenges kind of feeds into this stuff. You should probably have this already. What you're doing in concept, though, you're really flushing out your concept from like a general idea that could be a brief that is 1 page long into a PRD, and a PRD is usually 10 to 15 pages long, kind of giving you a sense of what's involved. You're really providing some substance to your design. And yeah, that's it. Then you can have a concept green light. So between each phase, so like between prototype and concept, there is a green light. And effectively, green light, green light, green light, green light, and this is like the worldwide group. It's like, you know, the last green light is basically approval to go to market. These green lights are a great opportunity to get in a larger studio, to get all your internal stakeholders aligned as to what you're doing. And what the green light means is that you are receiving budget approval to move on to the next stage. Even if you're a small studio, and I will stress this, even if you're a 2-people studio, you want to have a green light. You want to work towards a goal and set a milestone for yourselves. And the person that is to manage the green light process is the person who is assigned as a producer. And you will tell yourself, I'm going to spend 3 weeks in the concept phase. And at the concept, you're just basically working on documentation. You're just writing things down. But the fact that you set yourself a deadline, and at the end of the deadline, you, your partner, maybe the freelancer project manager that you're collaborating with, maybe you have another industry friend that is helping you with some mentorship advice, you know, kind of keeping a clear head while you are dreaming. You know, you bring all the stakeholders in, you know, saying, okay, let's analyze what we have produced so far. Does it make sense? Do we need anything else? Are there any unknowns that we should clarify at this stage? You want to put yourself in a position with the concept stage to have a compelling game design set of principles, pillars, if you will, and prepare yourself for the prototype. You need, in prototype, you should know what you're trying to build. You should know what is the fun gameplay mechanic that you want to explore. And you need to do all of that thinking before you start coding. I can ask, this is again one of those things. Yes, I know in game making there's a shit ton of iteration that you have to do. You know, you throw away a tremendous amount of work doing that. What you should try to do at an intellectual level is to prevent throwing away as much work as you otherwise could. And that means reflecting and aligning. All right, the concept phase is an opportunity for you to align your team for the true north as a creative goal. Okay, this is the true north as we understand it. The producer will set the true north, and if everyone is aligned, that is the true north. Now, as you develop the game, you are going to iterate. It's just going to happen. You're going to explore. You're going to maybe take a different path that you envisioned initially, but it's important from the beginning to know where you're going. So that's what the concept phase is for. All right, you go into the concept phase. You spend, literally, this should take weeks. It shouldn't be a convoluted process. You know, we all heard, because we talked about Anthem briefly earlier. Anthem spent, so concept through pre-pro, 3 years.
Oh dear.
Oh dear. And that's a reflection of a deeper team dysfunction that happens, the inability to align everyone around a clear concept. What Anthem lacked, and the postmortems are fairly clear on this, Anthem lacked a true creative leader for the project, a producer that could own the creative vision. There were a lot of cooks in the kitchen, all of them coming off very, like legendary projects. You know, you had a designer for Mass Effect and the executive producer for Dragon Age, right? Yes.
Do you think the producer should develop as well, or do you think the producer should distance themselves from the development process to see everything from
My opinion is that if you can afford it, the producer should not develop. There is so much work that the producer needs to do at the team level, at the business level, aligning people, watching over all the risk, managing risk. You know, the producer, by definition, manages risk, and there are so many risks on your project. And these risks accelerate as you proceed in your development. It just gets bigger and bigger. And I don't see how you could possibly have the producer doing something else unless you were talking about a very small team. And it's probably okay to run with a small team all the way to pre-production, but you cannot truly develop a game with a small team unless you're willing to sacrifice your life for many years. And by the way, that's an okay choice to make, but you have to be cognizant that that's what you're doing, right? That you're like putting your life on hold, dedicating all your time and resources to making your game. And sometimes that's what it takes to make an amazing game. That's how Minecraft was made. It was made by one guy with some freelancer support, you know, like he did have some help. It wasn't just him, but it was mostly just him. And he was everything. He was the producer, the designer, and the artist, and the engineer, of course. But that's not the path that I would recommend. And even when you're in a very small team, you have to be cognizant that the task that the producer has to cover will take time. So just allocate yourself, like if you're the producer, but also the artist and a little bit of a coder, you know, task yourself in a manner that allows you to be a producer. That you can run the team meetings, that you can mitigate the risks, that you can meet with the publishers, that the producer will probably be the person that is pitching the game over and over again, that you can travel to game conferences, that you can keep abreast of what is happening in the industry, because you cannot rely on your other teammates to do so necessarily. They may surprise you and come to you with like, hey, I read this article and you know they said so and so about games in our particular target, but you can't rely on that. So, coming back to this, we talked about green lights and how important they are, kind of setting milestones for the team, and providing an opportunity for the team to kill, okay, what happens in the green light? I mentioned kill there for a second and I stopped myself because that's the most extreme outcome of a green light. But it does happen that you kill games, and it can happen at every green light stage. For example, and even on a small indie team, you can make a team decision to kill it, right? Maybe you have, in preparation for the green light, talk to your mentor about where the game is at, and then the green light is just formalizing what the team already knows. In other cases, what happens, you get into the green light and you realize that you didn't quite accomplish all your goals. You set yourself 3 weeks to get the job done, and you didn't get the job done. That's, by the way, useful information. You will know a bit better next time, not to overcommit. It can be a positive thing in itself. But if you don't meet the green light requirements, and you still think that the game has legs, the decision is not killed. The decision is to award the team more time to complete the green light requirements. And of course, you can have a successful outcome and it's like green lit and you move it to the next stage. But having that discipline and understanding what you have to deliver at each stage, it's less important than concept. The concept is so fluffy. It's like, okay, words on a piece of paper. Fluffiness, yeah. I mean, one thing that I would add, a concept that I didn't see on my sheet there, is I would love to see the artist starting to play with a mood board here. I don't know how that will happen. But look, it's PRD, right? It's high-level design documentation. It's kind of impossible to fail concept unless you did a really shitty job of that design. It could happen. Yes.
Well, I wish to address kind of dark topic. It not to be attended like right now, this question. But at the end of the day, we found that another kind of resource that you will manage is the emotion and the actual will to do something of the people which is working with you. So, I mean, it's not a concrete question. How do you address this kind of management of how hard you can push in terms of emotion?
Is it like morale? We're talking about engagement here, right? Like people's motivation to create a great game,
yes.
right?
And the will to make things in general.
Okay. So again, there are multiple levels of treating this. If you are talking about a larger studio organization, you need to create a culture of excellence. We are here to make amazing games, and you have to inspire that through your values. You have to define values. You need to have a mission and a vision for the studio. We're gonna go there. We're gonna be the best RPG studio in the world. And everything that we're doing from now until we become the best RPG studio in the world will be towards that goal. We'll become a bit better every year. So you can set up your goals to be continuous improvement. You can set up your goals to be quality in everything that we do. I'm just giving you examples.
Kaizen.
Well, so we actually were inspired by the Toyota production method. Which has nothing to do with games, obviously, with this idea of continuous improvement. So one of Amber's values is Kaizen. The first value is teamwork. We always said that we value the team ahead of the individuals. So in the games industry, it's very often that you find superstars,
yes.
People that have a big ego, and sometimes they're really good at their craft. But if they cannot work well in a team environment, they cannot survive at Amber, because we need teams to make games. We cannot, one person just doing their own thing is not going to deliver excellence. It will be disruptive. So we've seen that time and time again with very talented individuals but very ego-driven that would not care about the team, and they would be more disruptive than they would help, despite their amazing skill set and talent. So teamwork, we before I, that's kind of how we define it. Kaizen, quality, and community. That's Amber. But you have to define your values, what you care about, what you are dreaming of. Figure out what you want to be, and then set up some values that cater to that, and then set up concrete objectives for this year that take you closer to that ultimate goal. So that's one way to create culture. And there's no perfect recipe to culture. It does require quite a bit of introspection. It does require some trial and error to figure out what works for the studio. In a smaller studio, it's easier to be democratic. So I just listed the current values of Amber. 400 people, right? Teamwork, Kaizen, quality, community. Our initial values, when we first started the Amber as a company, we saw ourselves as an anti-corporation because we all had worked at other large studios in the past, and we saw plenty of dysfunction and weirdness. So our values were people first, flat structure, and civic spirit. Civic spirit is basically community. It's just another word for giving back. People first, we got so dinged by our own people when we had our first layoff. First ever in the history of Amber. It was like, 4 years into our history, we had a layoff. And at the time we were like 230 people, and I kid you not, we laid off 10 people. Okay? That's like less than 5% of the work.